there's a higher power than Parliament. People are really proud to be an Australian. I see myself as equal to multicultural communities.
Political activism runs through your family blood.
Victoria really needs change. I really learned the value of a dollar, making sure you pass that legacy down to your children and your grandchildren. But I used to be very involved both on stage and off stage as well. Legacy in the Parliament that I achieved. When I say the Lord's Prayer every day, I think that we kept this here.
Hey, I am Alina Reddy and welcome to Foreign Influence.
It was a wild experience.
Something clicked in me and I didn't want to be average anymore.
What I love about the Dragon is...
How did that come about?
Well, educated.
So he survived for about an hour?
Best young emerging actor.
Oh, wow.
It has to be on point.
Yeah, yes. A particular sketch with Rebel Wilson.
Never stop learning.
I decided to run away.
Here I am, continuing my tennis journey here.
Thought, that's it?
A few opinions about what
Passages.
That made your journey harder? Welcome to Foreign Influence. We are at the location of Parliament Victoria, and today we're going to have a chat with the Shadow Minister for Multicultural Affairs, Evan Mulholland. How did you get into politics?
Bit of a long story. I've always kind of had an interest in politics, and that goes to, I guess, my childhood. From when I was towards the end of primary school, my mum got elected to local government, and so was very involved as a local councillor and a mayor, and really put her heart and soul into that. So I kind of got to see how local politics works and got more and more interested in politics. When I got to university, I joined the local Liberal club at La Trobe University and got really involved in that, and obviously got super in the deep end in terms of politics and political activism. And I've always been on a Liberal side of politics. I grew up in a small business family where my dad ran a number of small businesses throughout his career, so I really learned the value of a dollar, learned the value of reward for effort and providing for your family, providing a service for your community as well. And we know that over 60% of new migrants to Australia start a small business, so that's really ingrained into me and into the sort of multicultural affairs space as well.
That's a big number.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes to how entrepreneurial and enterprising multicultural communities are.
Political activism runs through your family blood.
Yeah.
And what did your dad do?
My dad started off as a civil engineer, but he ran a couple of small businesses growing up, whether that been waste management, recycling, or even body corporate management as well. So he's always looking to do new things and looking at different ways, and he always ran his businesses out of the family home. So I had the luxury of growing up with Dad always at home as well.
Since you have been in the Parliament, what is the important change that you've been a part of?
There's quite a few that I've been able to, force different wins out of the government, from small pedestrian bridges upgraded in my community to different roads being resealed. But I think the most valuable one was last year, where the Labor government had an election commitment to workshop a replacement for the Lord's Prayer in Parliament. Every morning Parliament sits, we say the Our Father prayer, which is really an acknowledgement of responsible service. And I didn't want to see it go. It has 167, now 68 years of tradition in our Parliament, and is such a calling and action call of responsible service. It also acknowledges there's a higher power than Parliament, which I think for our multicultural and multi-faith communities, and those are really intertwined, it was really important to keep that Lord's Prayer, and we saw an extraordinary joint statement from Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne, the Anglican Diocese of Melbourne, the Board of Imams Victoria, the Hindu Council of Victoria and the Jewish Affairs Council, all on a unity ticket supporting the Lord's Prayer in Parliament. And I really stood up for those faith communities. I started a online Parliament petition to the Upper House to retain the Lord's Prayer in Parliament. That achieved almost 11,000 signatures.
Wow.
And because it was over 10,000, it reached the threshold for there to be a public debate in the Parliament about that issue, where the government was forced to defend their position, and I, of course, wanted to retain the Lord's Prayer. And in the government's response, where you had in the gallery all these different multi-faith and multicultural communities packed in the gallery, about 80 people in the gallery, the government then announced a massive backflip and said they would no longer be keeping their election commitment to get rid of the Lord's Prayer and would be keeping it.
What a win!
Again, it's not a new road or a new bridge, but in terms of a lasting legacy in the Parliament that I achieved, when I say the Lord's Prayer every day, I think that we kept this here.
And it's much more meaningful to you and also to the people who signed the petition.
Absolutely, and it was jubilation afterwards with so many communities in the Parliament that we were able to achieve it together.
That's terrific. Your position is the Shadow Multicultural Minister. What does that entail?
So, as the Shadow Minister for Multicultural Affairs, I think is an important leadership role, and I think I see myself as equal to multicultural communities. We have a large number of people who speak English as a second language, people whose either parents or themselves were born overseas, and I see that as extremely important to make sure that we have proper integration programs, to make sure we're supporting multicultural communities, whether it be for their own events or through their educational programs as well. And I really see the portfolio as needing more integration with every other portfolio of government, whether it be the arts, which I also hold, infrastructure, whether it be education as well, and making sure more languages are taught in our schools. We need to look at multicultural affairs as not siloed, but a cross-government portfolio where we are making sure that as a government and as a parliament, we are communicating our message to every corner of this state. And we really saw the effects of that during COVID, where many people did not get the health messages into their communities because they weren't properly translated into every language. And we saw particularly in areas like my electorate in the northern suburbs where people suffered as a result of that. And so I see it as a leadership role to make sure we are doing our absolute best and are engaging, including engaging with multicultural media, to make sure our message is gotten across.
Why do politicians always fight in the Parliament?
Lower houses tend to be more aggressive than the upper house. I really grew up in that culture and learnt that culture. One for mum, one for dad, and one for the country. And that's a real legacy that's passed on to me as well, for my family.
Lovely view of Spring Street. I love hearing on the radio, Spring Street released this statement or that statement because Parliament of Victoria is located on Spring Street.
That's right.
But my question for you, why do politicians always fight in the Parliament? What's up?
It's a common theme in Parliament, and it dates back to obviously throughout the Westminster tradition. It's often part of parliamentary debate, and parliamentary petition is theatre and also speaking off the cuff, and often, particularly in the lower house, it can get very aggressive. And what you'll see on the news is often the most aggressive part because that's coming through the media, but lower houses tend to be more aggressive than the upper house, where I am, the Legislative Council, because in the Legislative Council the government doesn't have a majority. So it actually has to work with the crossbench and the opposition to both pass anything or move on things during the day and get things done during the day. So upper houses is where I quite like it, because it's much more collegiate. You treat people like adults. Yes, we have the occasional argy-bargies and fights, but it's much more friendly.
What's your view on the contribution that migrants have made to Victoria?
Just a fantastic contribution. You couldn't really see the story of Australia and the story of Victoria without the contribution of migrant families. And coming from a migrant background myself on my mother's side, being half Italian and growing up with Italian grandparents and Italian mum, I really grew up in that culture and learnt that culture so much and learnt the value of keeping your culture and making sure you pass that legacy down to your children and your grandchildren and keeping it a part of you. People are really proud to be an Australian, but still want to keep their culture as well. And we live in such a great state and a great country where that is celebrated. Your
and we can share it with each other,
exactly.
Educate
so
each other.
You look at the amount of big festivals that go on and celebrations that go on. Australia is very lucky. We're one of the only countries where that is celebrated and cherished and is part of our way of life.
Not long ago it was Chinese New Year and it was absolutely incredible what Melbourne put on and how many different people of different nationalities attended that festival.
It was fantastic. It was extraordinary. It was great.
Do you speak any other languages apart from English?
Being half Italian, I can understand the gist of a conversation in Italian. I can understand more when it's of a sort of Southern Calabrian dialect. My family all speak a very particular dialect, so if someone's speaking to me in conversational Italian, I'll be able to get a few words here and there, but don't ask me to speak it.
How has your Italian heritage shaped who you are?
That's a great question. Growing up in and around Italian family, I really value the story of my grandparents because it's like so many others. A lot of migrants these days arrive by plane. They arrived by boat. And they arrived by boat in the 1950s with nothing but a suitcase.
It was a voyage in itself.
It was. And worked so hard. My nonno worked 6 to 7 days a week as a metal worker just to put food on the table and provide for his family to get that first home and put his family through a decent education. There's so many similar stories like that. And I guess one thing I gained from that is the drive of migrants for their family. And that's a real legacy that's passed on to me as well for my family. And I see it in others that work so hard, that start a small business, that work really hard in a job to put food on the table, to get ahead for themselves and their family, to learn English. My grandparents didn't speak much English when they came to Australia, but they learned the language. As they got older, they still were struggling with some things in English, but they toughed it out. And many people do that as well today, and I see it today. We certainly can be doing a lot more, but knowing that lived experience on what it's like has me better placed in the role that I have now.
If you become the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, what changes will you make?
It's important to keep supporting our multicultural and multi-faith communities, whether that be through festivals, but I'd also like to see a lot more put into the education space as well, encouraging our multicultural communities through education. And also for a lot of people, particularly for that sort of first and second generation migrants, one thing that gets brought up with me quite a bit is making sure languages are taught in schools. We have a very rigid framework in our curriculum for what languages can be taught, but where there's a big Punjabi community or big Somali community, maybe we can review and look at our curriculum to not be so rigid so that teachers can teach those languages. So their kids can also learn, whether it be the Somali language, the Punjabi language, other languages as well.
So it can reflect the population.
Where there's a cluster of that community. And often it's the teachers that know, that are from that community as well. So that's one thing that's often raised with me. But if we zoom out for a bit on the broader, it's making sure that the multicultural affairs portfolio is not siloed. Often we can silo the multicultural affairs portfolio and internalise everything to do with multicultural affairs. Multicultural affairs is every portfolio. The Indian community chronically raised with me about the state of our roads in the outer suburbs and the amount of time they're spending in traffic. That's also a multicultural issue. The multicultural communities are constantly raising different things with me that I raise in the Parliament about lots of portfolio areas like education, like infrastructure, like small business regulation and land tax. And so making sure there's a real understanding across every portfolio, that every portfolio also can be viewed through the prism of a multicultural and multi-faith portfolio, and making sure that we know, given that we've got a very large population of migrants here in Victoria, that we're taking stock of that and accounting for that.
Who is the most memorable person you have met? I imagine you have met a lot of people.
That's a great question. Memorable person? I don't know. Someone that I've always looked up to is Peter Costello, who was our nation's treasurer during the Howard government. Someone I thought that was is still quite stoic and showed great leadership in running the finances of our country for a long time, and just a great sort of political character.
What is he like when you talk to him? Is he a nice person, friendly?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Very direct, very nice. One of his most famous sort of media stunts, he obviously pushed very hard for more people to have children, whether incentivising that through baby bonuses and things like that, and changed our social welfare system to have a real focus on families, more than he gets credit for, through family tax benefits, and really focused his attention on supporting families through our tax system, which the beneficiary today is our multicultural communities as well. And his most famous line is, in encouraging people to have children, was one for mum, one for dad and one for the country, saying people need to have 3 children. My wife and I are having our 3rd this July. We've got one on the way.
Congratulations.
So I guess we're following in those footsteps. Victoria really needs change, but I was so inspired by his tour of Parliament.
Evan, what are your hopes for the future? Something interesting about you.
Not many people know this about me, but I used to, back in the day, run a theatre company in the northern suburbs. So I'm quite interested in the arts, and now I've got the arts portfolio as well. I used to run an amateur theatre company called ARC and Archipella in the northern suburbs, which runs a couple of community choirs and runs a theatre performance every year, like a musical and a play. And that can involve, over 80 people in the whole cast and crew, and budgets of up to $50,000 and a whole lot of organisation. But I used to be very involved both on stage and off stage as well, so that was quite exciting.
Oh, that's great. So you could use your creative skills and skills to put things together and organise and manage.
Yes, well, I'm also a trained classical singer, so I don't...
more talents, really.
I don't tell that to many people, but it certainly helps me with my speeches in Parliament, and both my ability to hold my breath and project in
for your
Parliament as well.
diaphragm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wonderful. Well, you're a family man. Being a politician, how does that impact on your family life?
It's tough, but I make it work. It's making time for family as well. I love it because my kids come to multicultural events all the time, whether it's different churches or different festivals. One of the things that multicultural communities love is the fact that I bring my kids to a lot of events. I've had women in the Nepalese community saying, "Thank you so much for bringing your kids along, because it shows us that we can also bring our kids, but there are people in our community that we can look up to that are also have young families, and show that it's normal to bring your kids to events. It's normal to have your kids causing trouble at different events as well." They love it, and it's not only the Nepalese community and other communities, the Vietnamese community as well. I was at an event where I had to bring my baby daughter along, who was at the time about 6 months old. Her feet didn't hit the floor because all of the women wanted to hold, you know, and that's the great thing about our multicultural communities is that they're so nurturing and warm and so welcoming of children. So I definitely make it work, and I know that, you know, my kids, when they grow up, they will have such an understanding of our migrant communities and multicultural communities because they've lived it too with me.
That's terrific. And it just makes it for people to relate to you in a much easier way as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's an important leadership role in public life. In the last year, 3 of my female colleagues have had babies, and that's fantastic. And it's important for the public to know that this parliament isn't just full of old white people, it's actually young families, people with the same issues, people with the same mortgage, people from the same outer suburbs that have a seat at the table. And for me, as a young dad in the mid-30s from the outer suburbs, to have a seat at the table in the leadership team of a major political party, I think that's really important. And it means that I'm always thinking on how I can represent those people better.
Evan, do you remember the first time you have put your foot into the Parliament House of Victoria?
Great question. The first time it would have been in around 2011, and I was on a university tour of Parliament House. And the MP that was touring me around Parliament with all these different Liberal students from university was actually David Southwick, who was then the new member for Caulfield. Of course, now he's a great colleague and great friend, but I was so inspired by his tour of Parliament.
He is very inspiring when he talks.
He's really, really interesting and inspiring, and I was so inspired. I was like, gee, it would be great to have this job one day. The irony now is that David and I regularly organise for either Liberal students or our multicultural communities to come into our parliament and have tours of our parliament with us. And so we get the same reaction from lots of people. And I think, well, if I could inspire someone to think about entering politics, think about getting involved in politics in public life and have them enter into the parliament, that would be a great thing.
Evan, what are your hopes for the future?
Hopes for the future? Well, I hope that in November 2026, Victoria can elect a Liberals and Nationals government under Brad Batten. Victoria really needs change. We're heading up towards over $180 billion of debt, which is about $25 billion a day in interest just to service the debt. That's $1 million an hour. We have dilapidated infrastructure, or next to no infrastructure, in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, while the government's spending $34 billion on a rail line in the eastern suburbs. We need to be able to support our communities, support our multicultural communities, many of which live in the outer suburbs, which are being neglected under this government, who are very much focused on their priorities, which are not the priorities of multicultural and multi-faith communities. When you look at things this government has done, whether it be changes to employment law in faith-based schools, trying to get rid of the Lord's Prayer, I think it's clear that this government does not have the right agenda for our migrant communities. And you look at the neglect of the outer suburbs with housing estate after housing estate, but no investment in roads or public transport in those communities. Multicultural communities are feeling that, and they understand that they're being neglected, and I think they deserve a change.
Evan, what is your most favourite place in Victoria to visit?
That's a great question. I would say Yarrawonga. It's a small border town on the border with New South Wales and Mulholland, and I've been going there every year since I was a very young kid and continue to go and take my family along every year. Great quiet town with a lake, tourism town, where you can go jet skiing or go out in the water and go fishing, and it's got a great resort up there that's really good for the kids.
Evan, thank you so much for your time, and we wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you.